So in this video, I want to talk about one of the example of SAT math problem. And the question is, which of the following equations has a graph in the xy plane for which y is always greater than or equal to -1? So there are some choices for our answer right over here, and let's think about in terms of our solutions of our question before we think about it. Now first, the first thing that we need to know for solving for this question is the systems of function. And this is all about a function problem. And also the second thing that we know in order to solve for this question is an inequality of the function greater than or equal to -1. And let's solve for this question. So at first, let's think about in terms of what is function. And for the function, it is stuff that needs a specific input, which means we input some numbers, we plug some numbers to our original function. And if we input a specific value in our function, and the function it contains a specific equation for it. And with that equation, that is actually the thing that we want to figure out in this question. And then if we plug some numbers, which we call it as input, there will be a specific output that we know. So let's think about in terms of a basic format using these patterns. And let's think about in terms of on equality using this greater than or equal to -1. And the question said the y value should always be greater or than or equal to -1. So it should be greater or equal to, this is a sign that we use when we think about in terms of equal. And this is a sign that we use for something is greater or less. And for this term, y value should always be greater or equal to -1. But we know that the value of the y will going to be the output of our function. And we have learned a lot about it through a lot of videos. And if you think about it, which means, let's think about in terms of a first. For the a value is y is equal to a absolute value of -2. Absolute value means even though we input a negative value, we are thinking about a positive value. The reason is because we are only caring about a numbers from a 0. Even though it's 0, unless there's -5, the distance between this will going to be just 5. And let's think about in terms just a positive 5. The distance between this is also going to be positive 5. And we are not trying to find just a number with absolute value. We are trying to find just a distance between 0 and that number. So we don't care about the negative numbers. So that means if we input any of numbers, that should always be, this number should always be, y should be greater or equal to this one. And that means the y value can be less than -1. So let's just input a value of 0 into the x value. If we input a value of 0 simply, we will get y is greater or less than this absolute value of 0, -2. Absolute value of 0 is just 0, we get -2. But if you think about it, in the coordinate plane, this is a x coordinate, this is a y value. And for the y value, according to our inequality, it always should be greater or equal. But if you think about it, it is -2, which means this doesn't satisfy with our inequality. Our inequality should satisfy the greater than or equal to -1. So we can cancel this out from our choices. So this is not our proper choices for our answer. And if you think about the b for it, b's y is equal to x squared minus 2, but we are thinking about a inequality which is greater or less. So for this inequality, y is greater or less than x squared minus 2, which means let's simply input the value of 0 to our x value. If we input a value of x value, we will get y is greater than or equal to 0 squared. We input a value of 0 instead of x value, we get minus 2. We bring our minus 2. This term we're going to cancel out 0. We get negative 2. 0 comma negative 2. But if you think about it, the y value should be always greater than or equal to negative 1. But this case, it is less. It is same with negative 2, which doesn't satisfy our inequality again. So let's think about it in terms of c. So for the value of c, where c is y is equal to x minus 2 squared, so y is equal to x minus 2 squared, but we are thinking about an inequality which is greater or less than, and this term should be at least negative 1 to satisfy our equation. And let's simply input a value of negative 1. If you input a value of negative 1, we get negative 1, and the negative 2 square will turn into negative 3. We're going to be negative 3, and we are squaring it, which will turn to 9. So this actually satisfies with our inequality. Let's think about other points. Let's think about the case when this whole turns the x value, which makes this whole term is equal to 0. And this is a case when you input a value of x value into 2. 2 minus 2 will turn to 0. Square will just turn to 0. Even though it turned to 0, it is still satisfying our original inequality, which y value should always greater or equal to negative 1. So if you think about this, this actually satisfies with our inequality, but let's think about it in terms of d if this is right. So for d, it is y is equal to x to a third power minus 2, and then we need always should change into our original inequality, greater or less than. So if you think about it in terms when the x value is 0, when the x value is 0, it's going to be 0 to the third power minus 2, and this term we're going to cancel out as 0, and we get an output which will going to be our y value, which will going to be negative 2. But this term right over here, the y value should always be less than, greater than, or equal to negative 1, but it is same with negative 2, which means this term also doesn't satisfy with our original inequality. So we can figure out that our answer for this question was, C. And only thing that we need to remember when it comes to solving for an inequality function math problem, if there are some formulas for it, always we need to change equal sign into our original inequality in order to find input some values and then find the output if it actually satisfy with our original inequality. So let's think about in terms of y is equal to x minus 2 square graph, not a inequality one. And we're going to talk about inequality one in the few last videos. So at first, let's think about our function y is equal to x minus 2 squared. So if you graph it, y is equal to x minus 2 squared. All you have to do is input our values into our x value, and we see our output of our function, which will going to be y. And let's simply think about this function, simply picking off some points. Now first, let's think about when the x value is equal to 0. When the x value is equal to 0, we will get, instead of x value, we input our value of 0. So it will going to be 0 minus 2, and then squared. And this term will turn into negative 2, but we still have squared. Negative 2 squared will gonna be negative 2 times negative 2, which will turn into positive 4. So 4 is our output of our function, which will going to be our y value. So it has 0, 4. So that means it is on a y-axis, which means it is a case when the x value is equal to 0. So when the x value is equal to 0, we are going upward to the y direction, which will going to be right over here. This is a point 0, comma 4. And as we have learned here, we have learned in the last videos, for the a values in front of these parentheses, but in this case, it will going to be 1. And we have talked about the a case, which is our coefficient of this whole expression. We have learned that when the a value is greater than 0, the graph will go upward. When the a value is less than 0, which means when the a value is a negative value, the graph will go downward. And this is the case how the a value works. It doesn't really affect when it comes to graphing a function. So at first, let's think about other points to graph. But before we think about it, we know that our a value right now is positive 1, which means the graph will go upward. So if you think about other points to graph, let's think about the case when the x value is equal to 2. When the x value is equal to 2, we're going to be 2 minus 2. We inputted our value of 2 instead of x value. Then there will gonna be a square. And then 2 minus 2 will just simply cancel out as 0. And 0 squared will turn into 0. So when you input our value of the x value as 2, the y value will going to be 0. And this is the opposite case of this term, where this term was on the y-axis, which means the x value is equal to 0. But this term, the y value is equal to 0, which means it will going to be on the x-axis. And it is positive, which means when the y value is 0, x value will going to be right over here. And it is a case 2, 0. And let's think about other points to graph. So first, if you think about the points when the x value is 3, let's think about when the x value is 6. When the x value is 6, we will get 6 minus 2 squared. This term will gonna be 4, then squared will going to be 16. Let's pick other points to graph. So let's pick the point 5 when the x value is 5. It will going to be y is equal to 5 minus 2 in the square. This term will going to turn into 3 in the square. It will going to be a positive 9. So if you input the value of x value into 5, the y value will turn into 9. So if you actually graph that, so it will going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It will going to be somewhere right over here. So we can actually figure out a graph if you know one more point when the x value is negative. So let's think about the case when the x value is equal to negative 1. When the x value is negative 1, we will get negative 1 minus 2 and then square. This term we're going to cancel out as negative 3. And then if you square it, it will going to give us a positive 9. So when you input a value of negative 1 as x value, the output of our function, which will going to be our y value, will going to be 9. So the negative 1 and then positive 9, which will going to be right over here. And this is a point where the x value is this point is negative 1 comma 9, and this point is 5 comma 9. So if we actually graph a function, it will going to be something that look like this, which passes all of our points that we graph from our equation function, which means this function will going to be y is equal to x minus 2 squared. And this will going to be a clearly quadratic function, since we knew that we're going to be a parabola, and it is a x squared term. So all you have to remember when it comes to solving for inequality questions, all you have to do is when it is equal, because it is a basic format of a y is equal to x plus b, or a quadratic functions format, all you have to do is convert into our original inequality form in order to solve for that question.